Zara Johnson, a black maid, had just given birth after 14 hours of labor when the hospital room door flew open. Alexander Sterling, a powerful billionaire, her boss, and the baby's father, stormed in, loudly denying everything and humiliating her in front of the nurses and doctors. But when he saw the newborn's bright blue eyes, identical to his own, Alexander froze, unable to accept the truth, and walked out. The video of the scene spread across social media, turning him into the center of public outrage. Zara now had to face the media, the court, and the cold-hearted father of her child. Why was this baby born, and will Alexander have the courage to change and fight for the son and the woman he once hurt? Before we go back, let us know where you're watching from, and subscribe because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. Zara Johnson lay in the hospital bed at Compton General, exhausted after 14 hours of labor. She held her newborn son close to her chest. The baby had stopped crying and was looking up at her with the most unusual eyes she had ever seen. Bright blue eyes, sapphire blue eyes that looked exactly like his father's. The door burst open. "Where is she?" Alexander Sterling's voice filled the room. He was tall, wearing an expensive suit, his gray hair perfectly styled even at this early hour. 2 security guards followed him inside. Every nurse in the room stopped what they were doing. A janitor froze with his mop in hand. "That baby is not mine." Alexander pointed directly at Zara. His voice was so loud it echoed off the walls. "This is nothing but a lie." "Sir, please keep your voice down," said Nurse Martinez. "This is a recovery room." "Don't tell me what to do." Alexander turned on her. "I know exactly what this is. This woman is trying to destroy my reputation. She's trying to trap me." Zara pulled her baby closer. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "Get out of here. Now." Alexander laughed, but it was not a happy sound. "Look at this act. The innocent victim holding her meal ticket." He stepped closer to the bed. "You really think anyone will believe that I would touch a cleaning woman, a nobody from the projects?" The words hit Zara hard. Around them, the hospital staff looked uncomfortable, but nobody said anything. This was Alexander Sterling, billionaire, philanthropist, the man nobody dared to cross. "You know the truth," Zara said. Her voice was getting stronger. "You know exactly what happened that night at your mansion. You know this baby is not mine." Alexander's voice cracked. "I have never seen anything so desperate. A maid thinking she can blackmail her way into my world." He pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my lawyers right now. You'll be lucky if I don't have you arrested." Then Alexander looked down at the baby, really looked at him for the first time. The infant was staring up with those impossible blue eyes, the exact same shade as Alexander's own eyes, the same eyes that ran in the Sterling family for generations. Alexander's face went completely white. His hand holding the phone started to shake. Zara saw it happen. She saw the moment he recognized his own eyes staring back at him. "You see it, don't you?" she whispered. "You see yourself in his face." Alexander stepped back. "That doesn't mean anything," he said, but his voice was quieter now. "Eye color is just genetics. It's random." "Look at him," Zara said. She turned the baby slightly so the morning light hit his face. "Really look at him, Alexander. Look at your son." Alexander stared for several more seconds. The baby looked back at him with those ancient blue eyes. The resemblance was impossible to deny. Not just the eyes, but the nose, the shape of the face, the strong jawline already visible even in an infant. Then Alexander's face hardened. "No." He turned away. "I don't know what game you're playing, but it ends now. You will never get a penny from me. You will never use my name. And if you try to spread these lies, it's not a lie," Zara said quietly, "and you know it." Alexander walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back. For just a moment, his eyes met Zara's. She saw something flicker there, something vulnerable, something almost human. Then it was gone. "Stay away from me," he said coldly. "Stay away from my family. Stay away from my life." The door slammed shut behind him. Zara held her son tight as tears rolled down her face. Around them, the hospital staff slowly went back to work, but she could feel them staring. She could already hear the whispers starting. "It's okay, baby," she whispered to her son. "Mama's here. Mama will always protect you." But her mind was already going back to 10 months ago, back to Beverly Hills and the Sterling mansion that looked like a palace, back when she was just another invisible face in a black uniform cleaning rooms that were already clean, arranging flowers that nobody ever looked at. Back to that night when everything changed. The Sterling mansion glowed against the Beverly Hills skyline like a beacon of wealth and power. Inside, the annual charity gala was in full swing. 500 guests moved through marble halls, their jewelry catching the light from crystal chandeliers. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses filled every room. Zara Johnson moved through the crowd like a shadow. Her black uniform was pressed and spotless. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun. She had been working for the Sterling household for 3 months, and she knew the rules. Be invisible, be efficient, don't speak unless spoken to. She carried a silver tray of champagne glasses weaving between guests who looked right through her. These people lived in a different world, a world where a single piece of jewelry cost more than her family's rent for a year. "More champagne over here," called a woman in a diamond necklace, not even looking at Zara as she spoke. "Yes, ma'am," Zara replied quietly, filling the woman's glass. The evening dragged on. Speech after speech about helping the less fortunate, standing ovations for million-dollar donations, all while Zara and the other staff worked invisible in the background, serving the very people who claimed to care about poverty. By midnight, the last guest had finally left. The mansion fell quiet except for the sound of the cleaning crew packing up. Zara was in the library, wiping down surfaces and collecting empty glasses. The room smelled of expensive cologne and whiskey. She heard footsteps in the hallway. Unsteady footsteps. Alexander Sterling appeared in the doorway. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled. His tuxedo jacket was gone. His bow tie hung loose around his neck. His hair was messy. His blue eyes were glassy from too much alcohol. "Still here?" he asked, leaning against the door frame. "Just finishing up, Mr. Sterling," Zara said, not looking up from the table she was cleaning. Everyone else went home. He walked into the room, moving carefully like someone trying not to stumble. Staff, guests, board members, all gone back to their real lives, their real families. Zara glanced up. Something in his voice was different, not the commanding tone she was used to. This was quieter, sadder. "Must be nice." Alexander continued moving to the window that looked out over the city. "Having people who actually care about you." Zara kept cleaning, but she was listening now, really listening. "You know what's funny?" Alexander turned around to face her. "I throw these parties every year, raise millions of dollars, get my picture in all the papers. Everyone tells me how wonderful I am." He laughed, but there was no joy in it. "But at the end of the night, I'm still alone." Zara stopped cleaning. She had never heard him talk like this before, never heard him sound so human. "I have everything," Alexander said, gesturing around the room, filled with priceless art and furniture. "More money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, houses all over the world, people who jump when I snap my fingers." He sat down heavily in a leather chair. "But I don't have anyone who actually gives a damn about me." "Mr. Sterling," Zara said quietly, "maybe you should get some rest." "Rest?" He shook his head. "You know what I dream about when I rest nothing. Empty rooms, empty beds, empty life." He looked directly at her for the first time. "You're different from the others." "Sir." "The other staff. They look at me and see dollar signs. They want something from me. But you," he studied her face. "You just listen. You don't want anything." Zara felt uncomfortable under his stare. "I should finish cleaning and let you get some sleep." "Don't go." The words came out quickly, almost desperately. "Please, just stay for a minute. Talk to me like I'm a normal person." Zara hesitated. Every instinct told her to leave. This was dangerous territory. But something in his voice, something broken and lonely, made her stay. "What would you like to talk about?" she asked carefully. "Anything. Everything. What's your name? Your real name, not just the cleaning girl." "Zara. Zara Johnson. Zara." He repeated it slowly. "That's a beautiful name. Where are you from, Zara?" "Compton," she said, then immediately regretted it. Rich people didn't want to hear about places like Compton, but Alexander just nodded. "That's real. That's honest. I grew up in Connecticut, boarding schools, nannies. My father only talked to me when I disappointed him, which was often." Zara found herself sitting down in the chair across from him. "That sounds lonely." It was. Alexander leaned forward. "My whole life has been lonely. Even when I'm surrounded by people, I'm alone. Do you know what that feels like?" Zara thought about her own life, her mother who died when she was 19. No father, working 3 jobs just to survive. "Yes," she said quietly. "I do. I thought you might." Alexander's voice was getting softer. That's why you're different. You understand." They sat in silence for a moment. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked loudly. "I should go," Zara said, starting to stand up. "Wait." Alexander stood up too, moving closer to her. "Zara, I don't want to be alone tonight." Zara's heart started beating faster. She knew what he was asking. She knew how dangerous this was. Rich men like Alexander Sterling didn't see women like her as real people. They saw them as objects to use and throw away. "Mr. Sterling, this isn't a good idea." "I know," he said, but he kept moving closer. "I know it's not smart. I know it's not right, but I'm tired of being smart. I'm tired of being right. I'm tired of being alone." His hand reached up and touched her cheek. His skin was warm. His eyes were pleading. "Please," he whispered, "just tonight. Let me pretend I'm someone worth caring about." Zara knew she should run. She knew this would end badly. Rich white men like Alexander didn't care about poor black women like her. They used them and discarded them. But looking into his eyes, she saw the same loneliness she felt every night when she went home to her empty apartment. "Just tonight," she whispered back. What happened next changed everything. In the library of the Sterling mansion, surrounded by books worth more than she would ever earn, Zara Johnson made the choice that would give her a son and destroy her life. Afterward, they lay together on the leather couch. Alexander's arm was around her shoulders. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. "Thank you," Alexander said finally, "for listening, for staying, for making me feel human." Zara didn't reply. She was already starting to regret what had happened, already knowing that tomorrow he would go back to being the cold, commanding Mr. Sterling, and she would go back to being invisible. "I should go now," she said, sitting up and reaching for her clothes. "Of course." Alexander's voice was already changing, becoming more distant, more formal. What happened here? It stays between us." "I understand," Zara said, getting dressed quickly. She had heard the shift in his tone. The rich man was back. The lonely, vulnerable person was gone. She gathered her cleaning supplies and headed for the door. "Zara," Alexander called after her. She turned back hopefully. "Make sure the library is properly cleaned before you leave," he said, not meeting her eyes. "And close the door behind you." The words hit her like a slap. Just like that, she was the cleaning woman again. Just like that, the moment was erased. "Yes, Mr. Sterling," she said quietly and left. 6 weeks later, Zara sat in her tiny bathroom in Compton, staring at a pregnancy test. 2 pink lines stared back at her clear as day. She was pregnant. She was pregnant with Alexander Sterling's baby, and she had absolutely no idea what to do about it. For 2 weeks, Zara carried the secret like a weight in her chest. 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test hidden in her purse. 2 pink lines that meant everything was about to change. She still worked at the Sterling mansion, still cleaned the same rooms, still moved through the halls like a ghost. But now, everything felt different. Every time she saw Alexander, her heart pounded. Every time he barked an order without looking at her, she wanted to scream the truth. She had to tell him. She had no choice. The opportunity came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Alexander was in his home office working at his computer. The rest of the staff was busy in other parts of the mansion. Zara knocked softly on the door. "What is it?" he asked without looking up. "Mr. Sterling, I need to speak with you." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm busy. Whatever it is can wait." "It can't wait." Zara stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. "It's important." Alexander finally looked up, irritation clear on his face. "Make it quick." Zara's hands were shaking. She clasped them together to stop the trembling. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them. Alexander's expression didn't change for several seconds. Then he leaned back in his chair. "Congratulations," he said flatly. "I assume you'll be needing time off for doctor appointments. Speak to Rebecca about adjusting your schedule." "It's yours," Zara said quietly. Alexander's face went completely still. "Excuse me." "The baby. It's yours, from the night of the charity gala." Alexander stood up slowly. His face was turning red. "That's impossible." "I haven't been with anyone else," Zara said, her voice getting stronger. "Not for over a year. The baby is yours, Alexander." "Don't you dare call me by my first name." His voice was low and dangerous. "And don't you dare stand in my office and tell me lies." "I'm not lying. You know what happened that night. You know we nothing." Alexander's voice exploded across the room. "Nothing happened between us. Nothing ever happened between us." Zara felt like she had been slapped. You can't just pretend it didn't happen." "I'm not pretending anything because there's nothing to pretend about." Alexander walked around his desk until he was standing directly in front of her. "Let me make something very clear. I would never under any circumstances touch a cleaning woman, especially not a black cleaning woman from the ghetto." The racist words hit Zara like physical blows. She stepped backward, tears starting to burn her eyes. "That's not true," she whispered. "You told me I was different. You told me you were lonely. You begged me to stay with you." "I don't beg," Alexander snarled, "and I certainly don't beg to women like you. You're delusional if you think I would ever lower myself to your level. Women like me." Zara's voice was shaking with rage now. "What exactly does that mean?" "You know exactly what it means. Poor, desperate, looking for any opportunity to climb out of the gutter where you belong." Alexander's eyes were cold as ice. "You probably planned this whole thing. Seduce the rich white man and trap him with a baby." "I didn't seduce anyone," Zara shouted. "You came to me. You were drunk and lonely and you—" "I was drunk," Alexander cut her off. "If anything happened, which I'm not admitting, it was a mistake. A moment of weakness that I deeply regret." "A mistake?" Zara could barely breathe. "Your child is a mistake. It's not my child." Alexander walked to his desk and pulled out his checkbook. "But I'm willing to help you solve your problem." He started writing a check. $100,000. More than enough to take care of your situation and disappear from my life forever. He ripped the check out and held it toward her. "Take it and get out of my house. You're fired." Zara stared at the check. More money than she had ever seen in her life. Money that came with the price of pretending her baby didn't exist. "I don't want your money," she said. "Everyone wants money," Alexander replied. "This is enough to move far away from here. Maybe try a different state entirely. I want you to acknowledge your child." "It's not my child." Alexander's voice was getting louder. "I have never had relations with you. The idea is disgusting." "You're lying," Zara said, but her voice was breaking. "You know you're lying." "I'm calling security," Alexander said, reaching for his phone. "You have 60 seconds to take this check and leave, or I'll have you arrested for attempted extortion." Zara looked at him one more time. This was not the vulnerable man from the library. This was not the person who had held her and whispered that she made him feel human. This was a monster in an expensive suit. "Keep your money," she said quietly. "I'll raise this baby myself." "Smart choice," Alexander said coldly. "Now get out of my house and don't come back. If you ever contact me again, if you ever try to spread these lies, I will destroy you. I will make sure you never work again. I will make sure you end up homeless on the streets where you belong." Zara walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. "Someday," she said quietly, "when your child is old enough to understand, I'll tell him exactly what kind of man his father really is." "Get out," Alexander roared. Zara opened the door and walked out. Behind her, she heard Alexander slam something against the wall. 2 hours later, Zara sat on her narrow bed in the tiny room she rented in Compton. Everything she owned fit in 2 suitcases. She had $300 in her bank account and a baby growing inside her. But she also had something Alexander Sterling would never understand. She had her dignity. She had her truth. And she had a fierce love for the child he had already rejected. Outside her window, the sounds of the neighborhood filled the air. Children playing in the street, music from someone's radio, real life happening all around her. It wasn't Beverly Hills. It wasn't marble halls and crystal chandeliers. But it was honest. It was real. And it was where she would raise Alexander Sterling's son, far away from the cold, heartless world that had created such a cruel man. The baby kicked for the first time that night, as if to remind her that some things were worth fighting for, no matter how impossible the odds. 7 months later, Zara's life had become a daily battle for survival. Her small apartment in Compton was barely bigger than Alexander's walk-in closet, but it was home. The walls were thin, the plumbing leaked, and the air conditioner hadn't worked in years. But it was hers. She worked 3 jobs to pay the bills. Mornings at a diner on Crenshaw Boulevard, flipping eggs and pouring coffee for truck drivers and night shift workers. Afternoons cleaning office buildings downtown. Evenings taking care of Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who lived 2 blocks away. Her pregnancy was showing now. Her belly was round and heavy, making every task harder. Her back ached constantly. Her feet swelled until she could barely fit into her shoes. But she kept working because she had no choice. "Girl, you need to slow down," said Mrs. Washington, her 60-year-old neighbor who lived in the apartment next door. Mrs. Washington had raised 4 children by herself and knew the struggles of single motherhood better than anyone. "I can't slow down," Zara replied, rubbing her lower back as she climbed the stairs to her apartment. "Rent is due next week, and I'm still short $50. "That baby doesn't care about rent," Mrs. Washington said firmly. "That baby needs you healthy and strong." Mrs. Washington had become Zara's lifeline over the past few months. She brought homemade soup when Zara was too tired to cook. She helped carry groceries up the stairs. She listened when Zara needed to talk about the father who would never acknowledge his child. "Any word from that man?" Mrs. Washington asked, though she already knew the answer. "No," Zara said quietly, "and I don't expect any." She had tried calling Alexander's office twice in the past 7 months. Both times his assistant had hung up on her immediately. It was clear that Alexander Sterling wanted nothing to do with her or their baby. The contractions started on a Tuesday night while Zara was washing dishes after dinner. At first, she thought it was just the usual pregnancy aches, but then the pain got stronger and more frequent. Mrs. Washington, she called through the thin wall between their apartments. Her neighbor was there in seconds, taking one look at Zara's face and grabbing her keys. "Time to go, baby girl," Mrs. Washington said calmly. "Let's get you to the hospital." The ride to Compton General Hospital took 20 minutes through heavy traffic. Zara gripped the door handle as waves of pain washed over her. Mrs. Washington held her other hand and talked her through each contraction. "Breathe, honey. Just breathe. This baby is ready to meet his mama." The labor lasted 14 hours. 14 hours of pain, unlike anything Zara had ever experienced. 14 hours of pushing and breathing and praying. Mrs. Washington stayed by her side the entire time, refusing to leave, even when the nurses suggested she go home and rest. Finally, at 6:32 in the morning, Elijah Alexander Johnson entered the world. The doctor placed him on Zara's chest immediately. He was small but perfect, with 10 tiny fingers and 10 tiny toes. His skin was warm and soft, a beautiful light brown color that seemed to glow in the morning sunlight streaming through the hospital window. And then he opened his eyes. Zara gasped. The baby was looking up at her with the most incredible blue eyes she had ever seen. Not just blue, but a deep, brilliant sapphire blue that seemed to shine with their own light. They were exactly the same color as Alexander's eyes, exactly the same rare shade that ran in the Sterling family. "Oh, my Lord," whispered Mrs. Washington, staring at the baby in amazement. "Look at those eyes." "I've never seen anything like it," said Nurse Martinez, who had been delivering babies for 15 years. "Those are the most beautiful eyes I've ever seen on a newborn." Zara couldn't speak. She could only stare at her son at those impossible blue eyes that proved beyond any doubt who his father was. Alexander could deny it all he wanted, but genetics didn't lie. "Hello, baby boy," she whispered finally, touching his soft cheek with her finger. "Mama's here. Mama loves you so much." Elijah's tiny hand wrapped around her finger with surprising strength. He stopped crying and looked directly at her as if he understood every word she was saying. "He knows you," Mrs. Washington said softly. "He's been waiting to meet you." For the first time in months, Zara felt truly happy. All the pain, all the struggle, all the loneliness had led to this moment. This perfect, beautiful child who was hers and hers alone. But even as she held her son and felt overwhelming love fill her heart, she couldn't stop thinking about the man who shared those remarkable blue eyes. The man who had created this miracle and then walked away from it. 3 hours later, while Zara was trying to rest, her phone rang. It was Mrs. Washington, who had gone home to shower and change clothes. "Turn on Channel 7, Mrs. Washington said urgently. "Right now." Zara fumbled for the remote and switched on the small television mounted on the hospital room wall. A news reporter was standing outside Sterling Corporation's headquarters, speaking directly into the camera. Alexander Sterling, the billionaire CEO of Sterling Industries, was seen entering Compton General Hospital early this morning, the reporter was saying. "Sources tell us he may be visiting someone connected to recent rumors about his personal life." Zara's blood ran cold. How did they know? How did anyone know she had given birth? The answer came with the reporter's next words. "Sterling's legal team has been making inquiries about a former employee who claims he fathered her child. While Sterling has denied these allegations, the timing of his hospital visit raises new questions about the billionaire's private affairs." Zara's hands started shaking. Alexander's lawyers had been asking questions. They knew about the baby, which meant Alexander knew she had given birth, which meant he was coming. She looked down at Elijah sleeping peacefully in her arms, unaware that his world was about to be turned upside down. Those beautiful blue eyes were closed now, but she knew that when he opened them again, his father would be there to see them. The question was, what would Alexander do when faced with the undeniable proof of his son's existence? Alexander Sterling sat in the back of his black Mercedes outside Compton General Hospital, his hands clenched into fists. His lawyer, Martin Hayes, had called him at 5 in the morning with news that made his blood boil. "She had the baby last night. My sources at the hospital confirmed it. A boy." "That lying bitch." Alexander had snarled into the phone. "She's probably already calling reporters trying to make this my problem." "There's more," Martin continued. "Some of the hospital staff are talking. They're saying the baby has blue eyes. Very blue eyes." Alexander's phone had nearly slipped from his hand. The Sterling family's blue eyes were legendary. His father had them. His grandfather had them. Alexander himself had them. It was a genetic trait so rare that it appeared in less than 1% of the population. Alexander's jaw tightened. "Coincidence? I'm going to end this right now." "Sir, I strongly advise against that. If the media catches wind of this—" "I don't care about the media. I need to see this supposed child with my own eyes. I need to end this lie once and for all." Alexander hung up and called his driver. Within 20 minutes, he was speeding through the early morning streets of Los Angeles, his jaw clenched tight with fury, and something else he refused to acknowledge: fear. By the time his black Mercedes pulled up to Compton General Hospital, Alexander had worked himself into a rage. He would storm into that room, expose Zara's lies for what they were, and walk out vindicated. The baby would obviously belong to someone else, and this nightmare would finally be over. He never imagined that 15 minutes later he would be fleeing that same hospital in complete panic, his whole world turned upside down. What happened in room 215 would haunt Alexander Sterling for the rest of his life. The moment he saw those impossible blue eyes staring back at him from that tiny face, everything he thought he knew about himself shattered like glass. Alexander stumbled out of the hospital in a daze, his expensive suit wrinkled, his perfect hair disheveled. Behind him he could hear voices, commotion, the sound of people talking excitedly. But all he could think about were those eyes, those damn blue eyes that looked exactly like his own. His driver was waiting by the car, looking concerned. "Sir, are you all right?" Alexander didn't answer. He climbed into the back seat and slammed the door, his hands shaking as he tried to process what had just happened. The baby was real. The resemblance was undeniable. And worst of all, dozens of people had witnessed his complete meltdown. "Drive," he said hoarsely. As the Mercedes pulled away from the hospital, Alexander's phone started ringing. First one call, then another, then a constant stream of notifications. Something was happening. Something bad. He looked at his phone and felt his blood turn to ice. Videos, dozens of videos posted on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Videos of him screaming at Zara. Videos of his racist rants. Videos of the moment he saw the baby's eyes and his face went white with shock. The hashtags were already trending. #Alexander Sterling racist, #Billionaire's baby, #Compton Hospital meltdown. One video had already been viewed over 1 million times. The caption read, "Billionaire Alexander Sterling denies his own baby despite obvious resemblance. Listen to what he calls this new mother." Alexander watched in horror as his own voice played back at him through his phone speaker. "A lying black whore who thinks she can destroy me with her fantasy." His phone rang. Martin Hayes. "Alexander, what the hell did you do?" Martin's voice was panicked. "The videos are everywhere. Every major news outlet is picking this up. Your stock price just dropped 12% in the last hour." Alexander couldn't speak. He just stared at the videos spreading across social media like wildfire. "You need to get to the office immediately," Martin continued. "We need damage control. We need lawyers. We need a crisis management team." But Alexander wasn't listening anymore. He was watching a close-up video someone had taken of the baby's face. Those blue eyes filled the screen so bright they seemed to glow. His eyes, his son's eyes. The phone rang again, Then again, board members, investors, reporters, everyone wanted answers. Everyone wanted to know if the videos were real, if the baby was his, if Alexander Sterling had really screamed racist slurs at a new mother in a public hospital. By noon, protesters had gathered outside Sterling Corporation headquarters. By evening, the story was the lead segment on every major news program. By midnight, Alexander Sterling had become the most hated man in America. But none of the public outrage mattered as much as the truth that was now impossible to deny. Somewhere in Compton, in a tiny hospital room, lay a baby boy with Alexander's eyes, Alexander's nose, and Alexander's chin. A son he had spent months denying, now proven real, beyond any doubt. 3 days after the hospital incident, Zara finally came home to her small apartment in Compton with baby Elijah in her arms. The building looked shabbier than ever after spending time in the sterile hospital environment. The paint was peeling on the walls, the hallway smelled of fried food and old cigarettes, and the elevator was broken again. Mrs. Washington was waiting for her on the second floor, landing her arms full of groceries and baby supplies. "There's my little prince," Mrs. Washington cooed, looking down at Elijah's sleeping face. "And look at those beautiful eyes. Lord have mercy, I've never seen anything like them." Zara smiled tiredly. The past 3 days had been overwhelming. The videos of Alexander's hospital meltdown were still spreading across the internet, and reporters had been calling the hospital, constantly trying to get interviews. The nursing staff had done their best to protect Zara's privacy, but she knew it was only a matter of time before the media found her apartment. "How are you feeling, baby girl?" Mrs. Washington asked as they climbed the stairs to the third floor. "Exhausted," Zara admitted, "and scared. I don't know what's going to happen next." "What's going to happen is you're going to raise this beautiful boy and give him all the love that man never had," Mrs. Washington said firmly. "Don't you worry about anything else." Inside Zara's tiny apartment, Mrs. Washington had already prepared everything. Clean sheets on the bed food in the refrigerator, and a makeshift nursery set up in the corner of the living room. A borrowed crib, a changing table made from a dresser, and bags of baby clothes donated by women from the neighborhood. The ladies from church put together a collection. Mrs. Washington explained, "Everyone wanted to help once they heard about that awful man and what he did to you." Zara felt tears prick her eyes. For months, she had felt completely alone. But now, surrounded by the kindness of her community, she realized she had never been alone at all. The first night home was the hardest. Elijah cried almost constantly, and Zara had no idea what to do. She fed him, changed him, rocked him, sang to him, but nothing seemed to work. By 3 in the morning, she was crying along with him, exhausted and overwhelmed. A soft knock came at her door. Mrs. Washington stood there in her bathrobe and slippers, holding a cup of warm tea. "First night is always the hardest," she said, coming inside without waiting for an invitation. "Let me hold him for a minute?" Mrs. Washington took Elijah and immediately began swaying in a gentle rhythm, humming an old gospel song under her breath. Within minutes, the baby's cries quieted to soft whimpers, then stopped altogether. "How did you do that?" Zara asked in amazement. 40 years of practice," Mrs. Washington smiled. "I raised 4 babies of my own, plus half the neighborhood kids. Babies can sense when you're anxious. They need to feel calm and secure." She handed Elijah back to Zara, who tried to copy the same swaying motion. The baby remained peaceful, his blue eyes blinking slowly as he drifted off to sleep. "Thank you," Zara whispered. "We take care of each other here," Mrs. Washington replied. "That's what community means." Over the next few days, word spread quickly through the neighborhood about Zara and her unusual baby. People found excuses to visit, bringing food, baby supplies, and advice. But Zara noticed something else in their faces: curiosity, wonder, and whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room. "Did you see those eyes?" she heard one neighbor say to another in the hallway. "Blue as the ocean," came the reply. "Never seen nothing like it on a black baby." "You think it's really true about that rich white man being the father. Honey, you just have to look at that child to know the truth." The attention made Zara uncomfortable, but she understood it. Elijah was remarkable even beyond his unusual eye color. He was alert and responsive in a way that seemed advanced for a newborn. When people spoke to him, he appeared to listen intently. When they smiled at him, he gazed back with those stunning blue eyes, as if he understood every word. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman Zara used to care for, came to visit on Thursday afternoon. She took one look at Elijah and shook her head in amazement. 78 years I've been on this earth, she said, and I've never seen a baby like this one. Those eyes. It's like looking at pieces of sky. Everyone keeps saying that, Zara said, adjusting Elijah's blanket, because it's true. This child is special, Zara. You can see it just by looking at him. That evening, Mrs. Washington suggested they take Elijah to the small park down the street for some fresh air. Zara was hesitant at first, worried about drawing more attention, but Mrs. Washington insisted. You can't hide away forever, she said. This baby needs sunshine and fresh air, and you need to get out of this apartment. They walked slowly through the neighborhood, Mrs. Washington pushing an old stroller she had borrowed from someone down the hall. People stopped and stared as they passed, but their expressions were mostly kind. Children ran up to peek at the baby, then gasped in delight when they saw his eyes. He's like a little angel, said Maria, a young mother from the next building over. Can I take a picture? Before Zara could answer, Mrs. Washington was already posing next to the stroller, her face beaming with grandmotherly pride. Make sure you get those beautiful eyes, she said. Maria snapped several photos with her phone cooing over Elijah the entire time. I'm going to post these on Facebook, she said excitedly. Everyone's been asking to see the baby. Zara felt a flutter of anxiety. Maybe that's not such a good idea, with everything that's been happening. Nonsense, Mrs. Washington interrupted. This baby has nothing to be ashamed of. Let the world see how beautiful he is. That night, Mrs. Washington uploaded the photos to her own Facebook account with the caption, Meet little Elijah, the most beautiful baby in Compton. Look at those amazing blue eyes. #blessed baby #miracle eyes #Compton pride. Within hours, the photos had been shared dozens of times. Friends of friends began commenting, sharing their own stories of meeting Elijah or hearing about him from neighbors. The pictures spread beyond Compton, reaching people in other parts of Los Angeles who had been following the Alexander Sterling controversy. By morning, the photos had gone viral. Local news stations picked up the story first. The baby with the million-dollar eyes read one headline, Compton infant becomes internet sensation. The story was framed as a human interest piece about an unusually beautiful baby, but everyone understood the subtext. This was Alexander Sterling's son, and the resemblance was undeniable. Zara woke up to find reporters camped outside her building. Camera crews filled the narrow street, and neighbors were giving impromptu interviews about the miracle baby who lived on the third floor. I knew that man was lying the minute I saw this child, said Mrs. Rodriguez from apartment 2B. You can't fake genetics. Those are Sterling eyes if I ever saw them. That baby deserves better than a father who denies him, added Mr. Johnson from across the hall. But he's got a whole community here that loves him. Inside her apartment, Zara held Elijah close and watched the news coverage on her small television. The photos Mrs. Washington had posted were being shown on every channel, analyzed by experts, and debated by legal commentators. The resemblance is quite striking, said Dr. Patricia Williams, a genetics expert being interviewed on Channel 7. Blue eyes are a recessive trait, very rare in individuals of African descent. For this child to have eyes, this color and this intensity suggests a genetic contribution from someone with very strong blue eye genes. Another expert doctor, Robert Chen, appeared on a different channel discussing the legal implications. If these photos are authentic, and if Mr. Sterling continues to deny paternity, this could become a very high-profile custody case. The visual evidence here is quite compelling. Zara's phone rang constantly. Reporters wanting interviews, lawyers offering their services, and even television producers wanting to feature her story on talk shows. She ignored them all, focusing instead on caring for Elijah and trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. I never meant for it to go this far, Mrs. Washington said apologetically when she came to check on them. I just wanted to show off our beautiful baby. It's not your fault, Zara replied, though she felt overwhelmed by the attention. You were just being proud of him. I understand that. Are you worried about what that man might do when he sees these pictures? Zara looked down at Elijah, who was sleeping peacefully despite the chaos swirling around him. I'm terrified, she admitted, but I'm also relieved. Now the whole world can see what I've been trying to tell everyone. They can see the truth. That afternoon, while Zara was feeding Elijah, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You need to stop this immediately. Take down those photos or face the consequences. MH. Martin Hayes, Alexander's lawyer. Zara deleted the message without responding, but her hands were shaking. The attention was good in some ways, building support for her side of the story, but it was also dangerous. Alexander Sterling had unlimited resources and a reputation for destroying anyone who crossed him. As evening fell and the reporters finally began to disperse, Zara sat by her window holding Elijah and watching the neighborhood return to normal. Children played in the courtyard below their laughter, mixing with the sounds of dinner being prepared in dozens of apartments. This was Elijah's world, not the marble halls and crystal chandeliers of Beverly Hills, but the real, authentic community of Compton. People who had struggled and survived, who took care of each other, who celebrated a beautiful baby without caring about his complicated parentage. "Your father has money," she whispered to Elijah as his blue eyes gazed up at her in the fading light. "But you have something he'll never understand. You have love. Real love from real people who don't want anything from you except to see you happy and healthy." Outside, the city hummed with its usual energy, but inside the small apartment, mother and son existed in their own peaceful bubble. The storm was far from over, but for this moment they were safe, surrounded by community, and finally free to let the world see the truth that Zara had carried alone for so long. Across the city in Beverly Hills, Alexander Sterling sat in his study staring at the viral photos on his computer screen. Elijah's blue eyes seemed to look directly at him through the pixels, a mirror he could no longer avoid. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new demands for answers, new pressure to acknowledge what everyone else could already see. But tonight, for the first time since this ordeal began, Alexander found himself wondering not about legal strategies or damage control, but about the son he had never held and the life he was missing while hiding behind his walls of denial. The viral photos of baby Elijah had been spreading across the internet for 72 hours when Alexander Sterling's world finally collapsed completely. He sat in his penthouse office at Sterling Corporation, surrounded by his highest-paid lawyers and crisis management specialists, watching his empire crumble in real time. "Stock price is down 38%, reported his chief financial officer, David Chen. "3 major investors have pulled out completely. The board is calling for an emergency meeting. Social media sentiment is 92% negative," added Rebecca Martinez, his head of public relations. The hashtag #Sterling Scandal has been used over 2 million times. People are calling for boycotts of all Sterling Industries products. Alexander stared at the computer screen showing the photos that had destroyed his carefully constructed image. Elijah's blue eyes seemed to look directly at him, through the pixels, accusatory and impossible to deny. The baby was sitting in Mrs. Washington's lap in the neighborhood park, his face turned toward the camera with an expression of innocent curiosity that made Alexander's chest tighten with an emotion he refused to acknowledge. "We need to take legal action immediately," said Martin Hayes, his personal attorney. "File for emergency injunctions to stop the spread of these photos. Sue for defamation, invasion of privacy, intentional infliction of emotional distress." "On what grounds?" asked Susan Crawford, the crisis management specialist Alexander had hired that morning. "The photos were taken in a public place and posted by a third party. The mother didn't even consent to their publication." "Then we sue the woman who posted them," Martin shot back. "We sue the news outlets using them. We sue everyone." Alexander hadn't spoken for an hour. He just sat in his leather chair, rotating slowly back and forth, his eyes fixed on Elijah's face. The resemblance was undeniable, now that he wasn't screaming in a hospital corridor. Not just the eyes, but the shape of the nose, the set of the mouth, the strong jawline that was already visible even in an infant. "Sir," Rebecca prompted gently, "we need a decision on how to proceed." "DNA test," Alexander said, finally, his voice hoarse. "Sir, I want a court-ordered DNA test immediately." Martin looked surprised. "Sir, are you sure that's wise if the test comes back positive?" "If the test comes back positive, then at least we'll know for certain," Alexander interrupted. "And if it comes back negative, this whole nightmare ends." But even as he said the words, Alexander knew he was lying to himself. He had looked into those blue eyes. He had seen his own face reflected in that tiny features. Deep down, in a place he was afraid to examine, he already knew what the DNA test would reveal. "I'll file the paperwork this afternoon," Martin said. "Emergency motion for court-ordered paternity testing." "Make it fast," Alexander said. "I want this resolved within the week." While Alexander's legal team prepared for war, Zara was dealing with her own crisis. The viral photos had brought unwanted attention from all directions. Reporters camped outside her building day and night. Photographers with long lenses tried to get pictures through her apartment windows. Strangers knocked on her door at all hours, some offering money for interviews, others just wanting to see the miracle baby for themselves. "You need legal representation," said attorney Jennifer Williams, a civil rights lawyer who had contacted Zara after seeing the news coverage. Sterling's team filed papers this morning demanding a DNA test. They're also seeking a restraining order to prevent you from discussing this case publicly. Zara sat at her kitchen table holding Elijah against her shoulder while he napped. The baby seemed oblivious to the chaos surrounding his existence, sleeping peacefully despite the constant noise from the street below. "I can't afford a lawyer," Zara said quietly. "You don't need to pay me," Jennifer replied. "This case has national attention. If we win, and I believe we will, my firm will collect attorney's fees from Sterling. And honestly, I'd take this case for free, just to see that arrogant bastard get what he deserves." What happens with the DNA test? We agree to it. We have nothing to hide. The test will prove what everyone can already see. Jennifer looked down at Elijah, whose blue eyes had opened and were gazing up at her with startling intensity. "My God, the resemblance is incredible. Will I have to go to court?" "Probably. Sterling's lawyers will try to make this as difficult as possible for you. They'll question your character, your motives, your past. They'll paint you as a gold digger trying to trap a billionaire." Jennifer's expression hardened. "But we'll be ready for them." 3 days later, Zara found herself sitting in a sterile medical facility in downtown Los Angeles, holding Elijah while a technician prepared to collect a DNA sample. The room was crowded with lawyers, court reporters, and officials, all watching as if this was some kind of sporting event. Alexander arrived 15 minutes late, flanked by Martin Hayes and 2 other attorneys. He looked terrible. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit was wrinkled, and his face was pale with exhaustion. But when his eyes fell on Elijah, sitting alert and curious in Zara's lap, Alexander stopped walking completely. "Your Honor," Martin said to the court-appointed official overseeing the procedure, "my client is here under protest. This entire proceeding is unnecessary and designed solely to harass and embarrass Mr. Sterling." "Noted for the record," replied Judge Patricia Hernandez, who was presiding over the DNA collection. "Let's proceed." The technician approached Zara first. "I'll need to swab the inside of the baby's cheek. It won't hurt him at all." Elijah cooperated perfectly, seeming more interested in the brightly colored medical equipment than concerned about the cotton swab in his mouth. When the technician was finished, Elijah looked around the room with those stunning blue eyes, his gaze eventually settling on Alexander. Father and son stared at each other across the small room. Alexander's face went through a series of expressions. Shock, recognition, something that might have been longing, then a return to his practiced mask of indifference. "Mr. Sterling," the technician called. "Your turn." Alexander approached the technician's station like a man walking to his execution. The swab procedure took less than 30 seconds, but those 30 seconds felt like an eternity to everyone in the room. "Results will be available in 72 hours, announced Judge Hernandez. "All parties will be notified simultaneously." As they prepared to leave, Elijah began to fuss. Zara stood up to rock him, and as she did, the baby's blanket slipped, revealing his full face in the bright medical lighting. Alexander, who had been walking toward the door, stopped and turned back. For a moment, no one moved. Alexander stared at his son with an expression of pure anguish, as if he was seeing not just Elijah, but all the possibilities he had thrown away with his denials and cruelty. "He's beautiful," Alexander said quietly, so quietly that only Zara heard him. Then Martin grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the exit. "Don't say another word," the lawyer hissed. The 72 hours that followed were the longest of both their lives. Alexander holed up in his penthouse, refusing all calls and meetings, while his stock price continued to plummet and protesters gathered outside Sterling Corporation headquarters. Zara stayed in her apartment, trying to maintain some normalcy for Elijah, while reporters and curiosity seekers continued their vigil on the street below. Mrs. Washington had become her unofficial bodyguard, screening visitors and running interference with the media. "Whatever that test says," Mrs. Washington told her on the 3rd morning, "that baby is loved. He's got a whole community here that would do anything for him." "I know," Zara replied, but her voice was tight with anxiety. "I just want this to be over." The call came at exactly 3 p.m. on Friday afternoon. Judge Hernandez's office contacted both legal teams simultaneously with the results. Probability of paternity, 99.97%. Alexander Sterling was definitively, scientifically, undeniably the father of Elijah Johnson. Within minutes, the news leaked to the media. By 4 p.m., every major news outlet was reporting the results. By 5 p.m., Alexander's stock price had hit rock bottom. By 6 p.m., protesters outside Sterling Corporation were chanting, "Sterling's a liar! Sterling's a liar!" In his penthouse, Alexander sat alone in his study, holding the official DNA report with shaking hands. The numbers blurred together through his tears, but their meaning was crystal clear. He had a son. He had always had a son, and he had spent the first month of that son's life denying his existence and destroying the woman who had carried him. For the first time since his father's death, Alexander Sterling broke down and cried. In Compton, Zara held Elijah against her chest and watched the news coverage of the DNA results. Justice had finally been served, but it felt hollow somehow. She had never wanted to destroy Alexander. She had only wanted him to acknowledge their son. "What happens now?" Mrs. Washington asked. "I don't know," Zara admitted, "but at least the world knows the truth." Outside her window, the crowd of reporters was growing larger. Camera crews from national news programs were setting up in the courtyard. The story of the billionaire who denied his own child had become a symbol of everything wrong with wealth and privilege in America. But inside the small apartment away from the cameras and chaos, a mother held her son and whispered promises that no DNA test could quantify. Promises of love protection and a future where Elijah would never have to wonder if he was wanted. The scientific proof was in, but the real battle was just beginning. The DNA results changed everything and nothing at the same time. Within hours of the official announcement, Alexander Sterling found himself facing the biggest crisis of his career. Board members demanded his immediate resignation. Major clients canceled contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Protesters outside Sterling Corporation headquarters grew from dozens to thousands, their chants echoing through the glass towers of downtown Los Angeles. But the public pressure was nothing compared to the private reckoning Alexander faced in his penthouse that night. He sat in his study, the DNA report spread across his mahogany desk, the numbers staring back at him like an indictment. 99.97%. No room for doubt. No space for denial. Elijah Johnson was his son. His phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, lawyers, and business associates, but Alexander ignored them all. Instead, he found himself staring at the viral photos of Elijah that had started this avalanche. The baby's blue eyes seemed to follow him around the room, a constant reminder of the truth he had fought so hard to avoid. At 2 a.m, Martin Hayes arrived unannounced, using his key to enter the penthouse. He found Alexander sitting in darkness, still wearing the same clothes from the DNA testing 3 days earlier. "We need to do damage control immediately," Martin said, switching on the lights. "I've drafted a statement acknowledging paternity while minimizing your liability. We can frame this as a private matter that got blown out of proportion by the media." Alexander didn't respond. He just continued staring at the photos on his laptop screen. "Alexander, are you listening to me? Your entire empire is at stake here. If we don't act fast..." "Schedule a press conference," Alexander said quietly. "Good. I'll have the PR team draft talking points that..." "No talking points, no scripts. I'm going to tell the truth." Martin looked alarmed. "That's not advisable. Admitting fault opens you up to massive legal liability. Child support, emotional damages, punitive." "I don't care about the money." Alexander finally looked up, his eyes red with exhaustion. "That's my son. That's my child, and I've spent a month calling his mother a liar. You're not thinking clearly. The stress of this situation, get out." Alexander's voice was firm. "Set up the press conference for tomorrow afternoon, and Martin, you're fired." The next day, reporters packed the main conference room at Sterling Corporation headquarters. Camera crews from every major news network were present, along with journalists from newspapers, magazines, and online publications around the world. The story of the billionaire who denied his own child had become an international sensation. Alexander walked to the podium at exactly 2 p.m. wearing a simple black suit with no flashy accessories. His usually perfect appearance was subdued, almost humble. The room fell silent as he approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady but quiet, "I'm here today to address the recent reports about my personal life and to set the record straight." He paused, looking directly into the cameras. Somewhere in Compton, he knew Zara was watching. Somewhere in that crowded apartment building, his son was probably sleeping in his crib, unaware that his father was finally about to acknowledge his existence. The DNA test results have confirmed what many of you already suspected. Elijah Johnson is my biological son. The words hung in the air like thunder. Reporters began shouting questions immediately, but Alexander held up his hand for silence. For the past month, I have denied this truth. I have said terrible things about Elijah's mother, Zara Johnson, a woman who deserved none of the cruelty I showed her. I was wrong. I was cowardly. And I am deeply ashamed of my behavior. The room was completely silent now. This was not the defiant, calculating Alexander Sterling the media was used to seeing. This was a man stripped bare, admitting fault in front of the entire world. I cannot undo the damage I have caused. I cannot take back the words I said or the pain I inflicted. But I can acknowledge the truth. Elijah is my son, and he deserves better than the father I have been so far. Alexander stepped away from the podium without taking questions, leaving behind a room full of stunned reporters in a world trying to process what they had just witnessed. The press conference footage dominated news cycles for days. Social media exploded with reactions ranging from grudging respect for Alexander's honesty to skepticism about his motives. But the most important reaction came from a small apartment in Compton, where Zara watched the broadcast while holding Elijah against her chest. He finally said it, she whispered to Mrs. Washington, who had come over to watch with her. He finally admitted the truth. Words are easy, Mrs. Washington replied skeptically. Actions are what matter. What's he going to do now? The answer came 2 days later when Alexander's lawyers contacted Jennifer Williams with an unprecedented offer. Alexander wanted to meet his son. More than that, he wanted Zara and Elijah to move into his Beverly Hills mansion so he could be part of the baby's daily life. It's not a custody battle, Jennifer explained to Zara during an emergency meeting. He's not trying to take Elijah away from you. He's asking if you'll both come live with him. Zara stared at the legal documents spread across Jennifer's desk. The offer was staggering in its generosity. Full financial support for both her and Elijah. A trust fund that would ensure the baby's future education and security. Medical insurance, housing, everything she had struggled to provide for the past month. What's the catch? Zara asked. I've read through everything twice. Honestly, there doesn't seem to be one. You would maintain full legal custody of Elijah. Sterling would have visitation rights, but you would control how much access he gets. If you're uncomfortable at any time, you can leave with full financial support. He's trying to buy forgiveness, Zara said flatly. Maybe. Or maybe he genuinely wants to be a father to his son. Either way, this offers you and Elijah security and opportunity. Zara thought about her tiny apartment, the broken elevator, the thin walls that let in every argument from the neighbors. She thought about working 3 jobs while pregnant, about choosing between paying rent and buying groceries. Then she looked down at Elijah sleeping peacefully in his carrier and imagined him growing up with every advantage money could provide. I'll try it, she said finally, for him. But if Alexander thinks money can erase what he did to us, he's going to be very disappointed. 3 weeks later, a black sedan pulled up to Zara's apartment building in Compton. The same car that had once carried Alexander to the hospital for his DNA confrontation now came to collect his son and the woman he had wronged. Mrs. Washington stood on the sidewalk, wiping tears from her eyes as Zara loaded Elijah's few belongings into the trunk. You call me every day you hear, Mrs. Washington said, hugging Zara tightly. And if that man gives you any trouble, you come right back home. This is temporary, Zara promised, just until I figure out what's best for Elijah. The ride to Beverly Hills took 45 minutes through Los Angeles traffic. Zara held Elijah in the back seat, watching the neighborhoods change from run-down apartment buildings to manicured suburbs to towering mansions behind iron gates. The Sterling estate was even more impressive than she remembered from her days as a cleaning woman. The marble driveway stretched for a quarter mile, lined with perfectly sculpted trees and flowering bushes. Alexander was waiting by the front door when the car pulled up. He looked nervous, almost fragile, nothing like the commanding presence she remembered from their previous encounters. He approached the car slowly, as if afraid any sudden movement might send them fleeing back to Compton. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly as Zara stepped out with Elijah in her arms. "I know this must be difficult." Zara didn't reply. She looked up at the massive house that would be their temporary home and felt overwhelmed by its size and grandeur. This was a different world, one where she had never belonged and wasn't sure she wanted to belong now. "I've prepared the east wing for you," Alexander continued, leading them inside. "Complete privacy. Your own entrance if you prefer. I don't want you to feel trapped or uncomfortable." The east wing of the mansion was larger than most houses. Zara's suite included a bedroom, sitting room, private bathroom, and a fully equipped nursery that looked like something from a magazine. Everything was perfect, expensive, and completely impersonal. "This is beautiful," Zara said politely, though she felt more like a museum visitor than a resident. "If you need anything changed, just let me know. I want you both to be comfortable here." For the first few days, they barely saw each other. Alexander left early for work and returned late, giving Zara space to adjust to her new surroundings. She spent her time exploring the mansion, walking through rooms that contained more wealth than she had ever imagined, while Elijah slept in his designer crib or played with expensive toys that appeared as if by magic. The isolation was suffocating. After the close-knit community of Compton, the mansion felt like a beautiful prison. Zara missed Mrs. Washington's daily visits, missed the sounds of children playing in the courtyard, missed feeling like she belonged somewhere. Alexander's first attempt to spend time with Elijah came on a Saturday morning. Zara was feeding the baby in the nursery when she heard a soft knock on the door. "May I come in?" Alexander asked hesitantly. Zara nodded and Alexander entered slowly, as if he was afraid of spooking a wild animal. He sat down in a chair across from them, maintaining a respectful distance. "He's grown," Alexander observed, watching as Elijah drank from his bottle. "Babies do that," Zara replied coolly. They sat in awkward silence for several minutes. Alexander wanted to reach out to hold his son, but he didn't know how to ask. Zara could see the longing in his eyes, but she wasn't ready to bridge that gap. "Would you like to feed him?" she asked, finally, surprising herself with the offer. Alexander's face lit up with something between hope and terror. "I don't know how. It's not complicated." Zara stood up and gently transferred Elijah to Alexander's arms, showing him how to support the baby's head and hold the bottle at the right angle. Alexander's hands shook as he took his son for the first time. Elijah looked up at him with those stunning blue eyes, studying his father's face with curious intensity. For a moment, everything else disappeared. There was no scandal, no painful history, no awkwardness, just a father meeting his son. "He's perfect." Alexander whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, he is," Zara agreed, but her voice remained guarded. The feeding session lasted 20 minutes, but it felt like seconds to Alexander. When Elijah finished his bottle and fell asleep in his father's arms, Alexander was reluctant to let him go. "Thank you," he said to Zara as she took the baby back, for giving me this chance." Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Alexander would spend an hour each morning and evening with Elijah, usually with Zara present. He was gentle and attentive, clearly trying his best to be a good father, but the interactions felt forced and unnatural. They were like actors playing roles in a family drama, following a script, but lacking genuine connection. Zara began to feel like a prisoner in the Golden Mansion. She had everything she needed materially, but she was desperately lonely. The staff treated her with polite deference, but she wasn't their employer and she wasn't family. She existed in a strange limbo, neither guest nor resident. Alexander, meanwhile, was struggling with his own demons. Having Zara and Elijah in his house was a constant reminder of his failures as a man and as a father. He wanted to make amends, to build a real relationship with his son, but he didn't know how to bridge the chasm his cruelty had created. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday evening in November. Elijah was now 2 months old, and the artificial family arrangement was wearing on everyone. Alexander came home from work to find Zara packing their belongings in the nursery. "What are you doing?" he asked, panic creeping into his voice. "We're leaving," Zara said without looking up from the suitcase. "This isn't working, Alexander. This isn't a family. This is just 3 people living in the same house and pretending everything is fine." "But Elijah needs stability. He needs love," Zara interrupted, finally meeting Alexander's eyes. "Real love, not this cold formal arrangement. He needs to know he's wanted, not just acknowledged, because a DNA test forced you to admit the truth." Alexander felt his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble again. "What can I do? Tell me what you need, and I'll provide it." You still don't understand, Zara said sadly. This isn't about what you can provide. It's about who you are. And right now, you're still the same man who called me a liar in front of a room full of strangers. You're still the man who denied his own child for a month. Money doesn't change that. I've apologized. I've acknowledged my mistakes. Words, Alexander. Just words. Zara closed the suitcase and picked up Elijah, who had been watching the conversation with his usual alert curiosity. Your son deserves a father who loves him, not one who tolerates him. I do love him, Alexander said desperately. I love both of you. No, you don't, Zara replied with quiet certainty. You love the idea of being a good father because it makes you feel better about yourself, but you don't love us. You don't even know us. She walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. When you figure out the difference, maybe we can try again. But until then, Elijah and I are going home, to people who love us just because we exist, not because science proved we deserve it. Alexander watched helplessly as Zara left the mansion with their son, taking with her his last chance at redemption. The East Wing fell silent, emptier than it had ever been, while in Compton, a mother and child returned to the embrace of a community that had never stopped loving them. The mansion's gold-plated loneliness echoed with the absence of laughter and crying, while Alexander Sterling faced the hardest truth of all, that being a father required more than acknowledgement or money. It required the one thing his wealth couldn't buy: the capacity to love, without conditions, without lawyers, without the protective walls he had spent a lifetime building. The question now was whether a man who had never learned to be vulnerable could tear down those walls before it was too late. The silence in the Sterling mansion was deafening. Alexander stood in the empty nursery for hours after Zara and Elijah left, staring at the crib that would never be used again, the toys that would gather dust, the carefully arranged furniture that had become monuments to his failure as a father. He found the letter 3 days later slipped under his bedroom door while he was at work. His name was written on the envelope in Zara's careful handwriting. Inside, her words cut deeper than any legal document or public condemnation ever could. Alexander, I've tried to write this letter a dozen times, but the words never come out right. How do you explain to someone that love can't be scheduled or negotiated or bought with expensive furniture and trust funds? For the past 2 months, I watched you try to be a father the same way you run your business meetings. Careful, calculated, always maintaining control. But Elijah isn't a merger or acquisition. He's a little boy who needs to feel safe and loved and wanted, not just acknowledged. You hold him like you're afraid he'll break. You talk to him like he's a board member you need to impress. You schedule time with your own son like he's an appointment in your calendar. That's not fatherhood, Alexander. That's performance. I know you think you're trying, and maybe in your mind you are. But trying to be a father and actually being one are two completely different things. A real father doesn't need a DNA test to feel connected to his child. A real father doesn't need lawyers to arrange his relationship with his own son. Elijah deserves better than a father who sees him as a problem to be managed or a mistake to be corrected. He deserves someone who lights up when he smiles, who doesn't need to be taught how to love him, who would choose him every single day without contracts or conditions. I'm not writing this to hurt you. I'm writing this because I hope someday you'll understand what you're missing. Not just with Elijah, but with life itself. You live in that beautiful house surrounded by beautiful things, but you don't know how to be happy. You have everything money can buy, but you don't have anything that actually matters. Until you figure out how to love without conditions, how to be vulnerable without lawyers, how to be human without calculating the cost, you'll never be the father Elijah needs. And that breaks my heart because I see glimpses of who you could be. I saw it that night in your library when you told me you were lonely. I see it sometimes when you look at our son and your whole face changes, but glimpses aren't enough. Elijah needs consistency. He needs authenticity. He needs a father who chooses love over control every single time. I'm taking him home to Compton, where people know how to love without conditions, where he'll grow up understanding that worth isn't measured in dollars and that the most important things in life can't be bought or sold. If you ever become the man I know you could be, if you ever learn how to love the way Elijah deserves to be loved, then maybe we can try again. But until then, we're better off without the confusion and disappointment of this arrangement. Take care of yourself, Alexander. And maybe for once in your life, think about what would make you genuinely happy instead of what would make you look successful. Zara Alexander read the letter 17 times before he finally set it down. Each word felt like a diagnosis of everything wrong with his life, everything broken about the way he approached relationships and emotions and basic human connection. He crumpled the letter in his fist, then smoothed it out again. He wanted to call his lawyers to demand visitation rights, to use his money and power to force Zara back into his life. But even as the impulse arose, he knew it would only prove her point. Control wasn't love. Possession wasn't fatherhood. For the first week after they left, Alexander threw himself into work with manic intensity. He held back-to-back meetings, flew to 3 different cities for business deals, worked 18-hour days until exhaustion blotted out the ache in his chest. But the mansion felt like a tomb when he returned each night. The East Wing, where Zara and Elijah had lived, remained exactly as they'd left it, preserved like a shrine to his inadequacy. The second week, Alexander stopped sleeping. He wandered the empty halls at night, ending up in the nursery more often than not. He would sit in the rocking chair Zara had used to feed Elijah, trying to remember what it felt like to hold his son, trying to understand why those moments had felt so scripted and hollow. By the third week, Alexander's assistant, Rebecca, was concerned enough to stage an intervention. "Sir, you've missed 3 board meetings this month," she said, standing in his office doorway with a stack of urgent documents. "The Henderson merger is falling apart because you haven't returned their calls. And frankly, you look terrible." Alexander glanced up from his computer where he had been staring at the same email for 2 hours without reading it. Rebecca was right. He hadn't shaved in days. His clothes were wrinkled. His eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep. "Cancel everything for the rest of the week," he said. "Sir, cancel it all. I need time to think." That night, Alexander did something he hadn't done since childhood. He called in sick. Not to a meeting or a conference call, but to life itself. He turned off his phone, locked the doors to the mansion, and sat alone with the weight of everything he had lost. He thought about his father, who had raised him with the emotional warmth of a business contract. About his mother, who had died when he was 12, taking with her the only source of genuine affection he had ever known. About the walls he had built around himself to survive his father's harsh expectations and the corporate world's ruthless demands. For 38 years, Alexander had believed that strength meant never showing weakness, that success meant never needing anyone, that love was a luxury he couldn't afford in his climb to the top. But sitting alone in his mansion, surrounded by the evidence of everything he had achieved, he finally understood what Zara had been trying to tell him. He had everything and nothing. He had power without purpose, wealth without warmth, success without satisfaction. 3 weeks into his self-imposed isolation, Alexander received an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Washington stood at his front door, looking small but determined against the backdrop of his massive estate. "I came to talk to you about that baby," she said without preamble when Alexander opened the door. "I don't think Zara would want you here," Alexander replied, though he stepped aside to let her in. "Zara doesn't know I'm here. This is my decision." Mrs. Washington walked into the foyer and looked around at the marble floors and crystal chandeliers with obvious distaste. "This place is beautiful and cold as a morgue." Alexander led her to the living room, where Mrs. Washington sat on the edge of a silk-upholstered chair as if she was afraid of contaminating it. "That boy asks about you," she said bluntly. Alexander's heart stopped. He's too young to talk. Babies know more than you think. When he hears a deep voice, he looks around like he's searching for something. When Zara shows him pictures on her phone, he stares at them like he's trying to remember. Mrs. Washington's eyes were sharp and unforgiving. He knows his daddy is missing. Zara was right to leave. Alexander said quietly, "I don't know how to be a father." "No, you don't. But that doesn't mean you can't learn." Mrs. Washington leaned forward. "You think being a father is about being perfect, about having all the answers, about never making mistakes. But that's not what children need. What do they need? They need you to show up. They need you to try even when you fail. They need you to love them more than you love your own comfort." She studied his face carefully. "The question is, do you love that boy enough to become the kind of man who deserves to be his father?" Alexander thought about Elijah's blue eyes, so like his own. He thought about the weight of his son in his arms, the trust in that tiny face, the possibility of a love he had never experienced or understood. "I don't know how," he admitted. "Then learn, not from books or experts or lawyers, but from your heart. Stop trying to manage your way into loving him and just love him." Mrs. Washington stood up to leave. "That child is growing up every day without his father. Every day you waste feeling sorry for yourself is a day you can't get back." After she left, Alexander sat alone in his living room until dawn, turning her words over in his mind. For the first time since Zara's letter, he felt something other than despair. Not hope exactly, but possibility. The faint outline of a path forward if he was brave enough to take it. He thought about the man he had been in that library with Zara, vulnerable and honest and desperate for connection. That man had been real, more real than the controlled executive or the calculating businessman. Maybe that man could learn to be a father, but first he had to tear down the walls he had spent a lifetime building. He had to stop protecting himself and start protecting the people who mattered. He had to learn the difference between being strong and being invulnerable. It would mean giving up control. It would mean risking rejection and pain and failure. It would mean becoming someone completely different from the man his father had raised him to be. But as Alexander sat in his empty mansion, surrounded by the echoes of his son's absence, he finally understood what Zara had been trying to tell him. The choice wasn't between safety and vulnerability. The choice was between existing and living, between having everything and having what mattered. For the first time in his adult life, Alexander Sterling was ready to choose love over control, even if it meant losing everything else in the process. Outside, dawn was breaking over Beverly Hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. In Compton, Zara was probably feeding Elijah his morning bottle, talking to him in the soft voice Alexander remembered from the nursery. Their son was learning to smile, to focus his eyes, to reach for the world around him. And with each passing day, Alexander was missing moments he could never reclaim. The question now was whether his realization had come too late, or if there was still time to become the father his son deserved and the man Zara had seen glimpses of in his moments of genuine vulnerability. Alexander Sterling stood outside the modest apartment building in Compton at 7 in the morning, holding a single white rose and trembling like a teenager on his first date. It had been 6 weeks since Zara's letter, 6 weeks of soul-searching that had stripped away every pretense he had ever worn. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by simple jeans and a white button-down shirt. The fleet of security guards had been dismissed. The armor of arrogance had been carefully dismantled piece by piece. He had driven himself here in his personal car, not the company Mercedes. No lawyers, no assistants, no safety nets. Just a man who had finally learned the difference between having everything and having what mattered. From across the street, he could see into Zara's apartment through the thin curtains. She was moving around the kitchen, probably preparing Elijah's morning bottle. The baby would be almost 4 months old now, and Alexander had missed so much. First steps were still months away, but there had been smiles, sounds, moments of recognition that Alexander would never get back. He crossed the street and climbed the 3 flights of stairs, his heart pounding harder with each step. At Zara's door, he hesitated for a long moment, then knocked softly. "Who is it?" Zara's voice came through the thin door, cautious. "It's Alexander." Silence. Then the sound of multiple locks being undone. The door opened just a crack, revealing one of Zara's dark eyes studying him suspiciously. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see my son," Alexander said quietly. "And to apologize. Really apologize, not the corporate non-apology I gave before." Zara opened the door wider, and Alexander saw Elijah in her arms. The baby had grown so much in 6 weeks. His face was fuller, his eyes more alert and focused. When those brilliant blue eyes landed on Alexander, something magical happened. Elijah smiled. Not just any smile, but the kind of radiant, full-face smile that babies reserved for people they recognized and trusted. Alexander felt his knees nearly buckle. "He remembers you," Zara said softly, surprise evident in her voice. "May I come in, please? I know I don't deserve it, but—" "You can come in," Zara said, stepping aside. "But we're not doing this dance again, Alexander. I won't put Elijah through another performance of you playing father." Alexander entered the small apartment, and the contrast with his mansion was stark. Everything here was worn but clean, simple but filled with love. Baby toys were scattered on a blanket in the living room. Photos of Elijah covered the refrigerator. The apartment smelled like baby powder and the lavender soap Zara had always preferred. "He's beautiful," Alexander said, watching as Elijah reached toward him with tiny fingers. "He looks so much older." "Babies grow fast," Zara replied, settling into a worn armchair while keeping Elijah protectively close. "You miss a lot when you're not here." Alexander sat on the edge of the couch, maintaining distance, but unable to take his eyes off his son. "I know. I've missed everything important, and not just in the past 6 weeks. I missed your entire pregnancy. I missed his birth. I missed his first months of life because I was too proud and too scared to admit the truth." "Why are you here, Alexander? And please don't tell me you figured out how to love us, because we both know that's not how love works." Alexander reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I brought something to show you. It's a letter I wrote to Elijah. I've been writing him letters every day since you left, trying to figure out how to explain who I am and who I want to become." He held out the letter, but Zara didn't take it. "Read it," she said instead. Alexander unfolded the paper with shaking hands and began to read. "Dear Elijah, today, you are 123 days old, and I am just beginning to understand what it means to be your father. For most of your life, I have been absent by choice, hiding behind lawyers and lies, and the fear that loving you would make me weak. I was wrong about everything. I thought being strong meant never needing anyone. I thought success meant controlling everything around me. I thought love was something that could be managed and scheduled and negotiated. Your mother tried to teach me differently, but I was too broken to listen. I want you to know that your mother is the strongest person I have ever met. She worked 3 jobs while she was pregnant with you. She faced my cruelty and rejection with dignity I could never match. She chose to love you completely from the moment she knew you existed, while I chose fear and denial. She is the parent you deserve, and I am still learning how to become worthy of the title Father. I don't know if I'll ever be the man you need me to be, but I promise you this: I will spend the rest of my life trying. Not because a DNA test proved you're mine, but because you are the most important thing that has ever happened to me, even when I was too stupid to realize it. I love you, son. I love your mother. And I will fight every day to become the kind of father who deserves your love in return." Alexander's voice broke on the last words. He folded the letter carefully and set it on the coffee table between them. Zara was quiet for a long time, studying his face. "You've written him letters every day." 43 letters, sometimes twice a day when I couldn't sleep. Alexander wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I know it doesn't make up for anything, but I needed him to know that he was in my thoughts even when I wasn't brave enough to be in his life." Elijah was getting fussy in Zara's arms, making the small sounds that meant he was hungry. Zara looked at Alexander, then made a decision that surprised them both. "Do you want to feed him while I make his bottle?" Alexander's eyes widened. Yes, please." Zara carefully transferred Elijah to Alexander's arms, and this time, something was different. Alexander didn't hold the baby like he was afraid of breaking him. Instead, he cradled Elijah against his chest, talking to him in a soft, natural voice. "Hi, buddy. I've missed you so much. You've gotten so big and strong." Elijah looked up at his father with those stunning blue eyes, and Alexander felt something shift inside his chest. Not the calculated affection he had tried to manufacture before, but real, overwhelming love that took his breath away. Zara watched from the kitchen as Alexander talked to their son, and for the first time she saw genuine paternal instinct. No performance, no agenda, just a father getting to know his child. "He likes it when you talk to him," she called from the kitchen. "He's very alert for his age. The pediatrician says he's advanced." "Of course he is," Alexander said, his voice full of wonder. "Look at those eyes. He's taking in everything." He looked up at Zara. "Does he sleep through the night yet?" "Sometimes. He's getting better." Zara returned with the bottle and showed Alexander how to test the temperature on his wrist. "Not too hot, not too cold." Alexander fed Elijah with the focused attention of a man performing surgery. Every detail mattered: the angle of the bottle, the baby's comfort, the pace of feeding. This wasn't the distracted, obligation-based interaction from their time at the mansion. This was a father completely absorbed in caring for his son. "I fired Martin Hayes," Alexander said as Elijah drank contentedly, "and most of my legal team. I realized that having lawyers manage my relationships was part of the problem." "What about your company?" "I stepped back, promoted David Chen to CEO, and moved myself to chairman emeritus. I'll still be involved, but I won't be running day-to-day operations." Alexander looked up at her. I realized I was using work to avoid everything that actually mattered. Zara sat down across from them, studying Alexander's face for signs of deception or manipulation, but what she saw was different from anything she had witnessed before. Vulnerability, authenticity, a man who had finally stopped performing and started being real. I sold the mansion, Alexander continued. It was too big, too cold, too much like the house I grew up in. I bought a smaller place in Manhattan Beach, 3 bedrooms, normal-sized rooms, a backyard where kids could play. He paused. I was hoping maybe you and Elijah might want to see it sometime. Alexander, I'm not asking you to move in with me again. I know I destroyed your trust, and I know it will take time to rebuild it, if that's even possible. I'm just asking for the chance to be in his life, and in yours, if you'll let me. Elijah had finished his bottle and was making sleepy sounds against Alexander's chest. Without thinking, Alexander began gently bouncing him a motion that seemed to come naturally. I started therapy, Alexander said quietly. 3 days a week with Dr. Sarah Martinez. She specializes in attachment disorders and family trauma. I'm learning about the ways my father damaged me and how to break those cycles so I don't damage Elijah. That's good, Zara said, and she meant it. She says it will take years to undo 40 years of dysfunction, but she thinks I can learn to be healthy, to be the kind of partner and father you both deserve. Zara watched as Elijah fell asleep in his father's arms, completely relaxed and trusting. It was the kind of scene she had dreamed about during her pregnancy, the kind of moment she had thought was impossible when Alexander first denied their son's existence. What do you want from me, Alexander? I want the chance to earn your love back, not with money or lawyers or grand gestures, but by being present every day, by showing up when things are hard, not just when they're convenient, by putting you and Elijah first always. He looked down at their sleeping son, then back at Zara. I want to marry you. Not because it would look good for my image or because it would legitimize Elijah, but because I love you, because I want to build a life with you, because I want to wake up every morning knowing that the 2 most important people in my life are safe and loved and never have to doubt where they stand with me. Zara felt tears starting to form in her eyes. Marriage is a big step, Alexander. I know. And I know I have no right to ask after everything I've put you through, but Zara, I am asking. I'm asking you to take a chance on me, on us. I'm asking you to let me prove that I can be the man you saw glimpses of that night in the library. Alexander shifted Elijah carefully to one arm and reached into his pocket with his free hand. He pulled out a small velvet box and set it on the coffee table. I'm not asking for an answer today, he said quickly. I'm just asking you to think about it, to consider the possibility that people can change, that love can be learned, that families can be built, even after they've been broken. Zara stared at the ring box, her heart racing. 6 months ago, she was a cleaning woman invisible to the man she loved. 4 months ago, she was a single mother fighting for recognition of her child. Now that same man was asking her to be his wife. I need time, she said finally. Take all the time you need, Alexander replied. I'll wait. I'll prove myself every day for as long as it takes. Elijah stirred in his father's arms, opening those beautiful blue eyes and looking up at Alexander with complete trust. In that moment, Zara saw what she had been waiting for, not the performance of fatherhood, but the reality of it. Alexander loved their son truly and completely, and that love had transformed him into someone capable of loving her too. Ask me again in 6 months, she said softly. Show me that this version of you is real, that it's not just another role you're playing. Show me that you can be present for the boring days and the difficult nights, not just the special moments. Alexander's face broke into the first genuine smile she had seen from him since that night in the library. I can do that. I will do that. 3 hours later, Alexander reluctantly prepared to leave. He had spent the morning feeding Elijah, changing his diaper, playing with him on the living room floor, and talking to Zara about everything and nothing. It felt like the family life he had never thought possible. Can I come back tomorrow? He asked as Zara walked him to the door. Yes, she said. But Alexander, this isn't a trial run or a test. If you're going to be in our lives, you're all in. No more lawyers, no more conditions, no more protecting yourself. Just love. Can you handle that? Alexander looked back at Elijah, who was watching from his bouncy seat with those extraordinary blue eyes, and felt his heart expand in ways he never knew were possible. Yes, he said, I can handle that. I want that more than anything I've ever wanted in my life. 6 months later, Alexander Sterling and Zara Johnson were married in a small ceremony in Manhattan Beach, with baby Elijah as their ring bearer and Mrs. Washington as Zara's maid of honor. The guest list included neighbors from Compton therapists who had helped Alexander heal and a few close friends who had supported them through the journey. There were no paparazzi, no society photographers, no headlines about the billionaire's wedding. Just two people who had found their way to love through pain and growth, and the miracle of a blue-eyed baby who had forced them both to become better versions of themselves. As they exchanged vows on the beach where they planned to raise their family, Alexander looked into Zara's eyes and saw not just his wife, but the woman who had saved him from a life of emotional emptiness. And Zara looked back at the man who had learned to love without conditions, to be vulnerable, without shame, to be present, without calculating the cost. Their son gurgled happily in Mrs. Washington's arms, his blue eyes bright with the promise of a future filled with the one thing money couldn't buy, a family built on love, forgiveness, and the courage to choose each other every single day. The billionaire had finally found something worth more than his fortune, and the maid who had dared to demand recognition for her child had found a partner worthy of the love she had never stopped believing in. Their story began with denial and ended with acceptance, started with cruelty and finished with compassion, commenced with separation and concluded with unity. And through it all, a baby with impossible blue eyes had been the bridge that led them home to each other.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.